Hello and welcome to the International Society for Physical Activity and Health podcast. Today's podcast is one in a series of 9 podcasts on the 8 investments that work for physical activity. The 8 investments that work for physical activity are a call to action for everyone, everywhere, including professionals, academics, civil society and decision makers, to embed physical activity in national and subnational policies. It's time to get into our podcast for today with your host, Matthew Tepi Mclaughlin.
Okay, today we're joined by
Professor Charlie Foster.
Charlie has led the CommunityWide Programs podcast, and also the investment, of course, and is the past president of ISPAH. Charlie tells me that he was also involved in the 7 investments that work a number of years ago, which is really exciting to kind of have that continuity together. So Charlie, how are you?
Good, thanks Tepi, and it's really great to have a chance to talk about this exciting document and particularly on systems approaches and community-based interventions.
Yeah, so there's 8 investments. So can you describe the community-wide investment, your investment?
Sure. Okay. So community-wide investments are really the kind of opportunity for physical activity promoters at national levels to blend together a whole mixture of different types of interventions, often selected from the other 7 best investments that work in the document. And how we've tried to frame this particular intervention is within a systems-based approach. And what do I mean by that? Because it's a very popular term at the moment. What we're trying to do with systems is to include everybody who's a player in delivering physical activity promotion across the widest possible set of context, and not trying to think of things in terms of isolation or programmatic approaches. We're not just doing schools and then workplaces. We're looking at across all these different areas. And typically that's either a scale of a city or a national level. So it fits very well with community-based interventions, which tend to be the big coming together of these different programs under one banner. You know, you've got some great examples from Queensland, from the Rockhampton, those sorts of things, for example. And the final point about systems is about a collection of different stakeholders who see their role as contributing to the promotion of physical activity. It could be through promoting active travel, it could be changing the environment and the infrastructure, or it could be about economic and social regeneration policies. There's no one way, and that's the joy of the community-based interventions section, is because really it's a chance for countries and cities to blend their own experiences of what works. And within that section, and we'll go in a bit more detail in a moment, there's lots of variety of different ways we can tackle this.
Yeah, and I think it's the final investment of the 8, and that was done deliberately. And it sounds like a bit of a cocktail of the other investments. Second question I've got then is why this investment is important to boost levels of physical activity. Why can't we just tackle things in isolation?
Well, first of all, that we know that people's physical activity occurs across many different contexts. Whether you're an under 5 or an over 85, the activity that you'll do perhaps in where your education or at home as part of leisure or getting to and from in your everyday life all involves different areas. So the other 7 investments cover those areas individually, but the community-wide program asks questions about trying to promote physical activity in these different settings, but also the glue that holds it together is this idea of a mass media approach that kind of sticks together perhaps a campaign or get my city moving, and gives a kind of banner and a natural kind of central place for everyone to focus their energies and attention and to have their kind of unique local branding. So the programs and approaches could be different, but it's stuck together with a kind of community identity. And you and I know communities can mean different things to different people. And with every city, there are different communities and areas and sections. But I think for this, the scale doesn't matter. It's about how you decide you're going to target the population within perhaps a geographical area.
Sorry, you're saying it. Go ahead. No, that's all right. You're saying it could be city, national. I'm just thinking from and you probably know most about the UK, and same with me, in terms of examples. So is there an example in the UK of a community-wide program, or elements of a community-wide program?
Yeah, the great examples up north in Sheffield, with Sheffield on the Move program. And I know Lindsay would probably know quite a lot about that, who's one of our fellow producers of these podcasts. It's a very good example of how local politicians, local academia, the providers of physical activity in the sports and leisure sector, and then all those individual areas like transport, hospitals, primary care, schools, have really got on board with the systems approach and then worked out what's the best programmatic delivery within each of those sectors under one heading and under one branding. And that's the thing that's unique about community-wide interventions. There's a media and a communication push alongside many different options for local delivery.
Yeah, it almost builds a bit of a wave of doing stuff, targeting all of those different investments and bringing them together. Now that's a nice overview of what they are and kind of why they're important to bring together the other investments. So what was some of the evidence discussed that went into this investment, and some of the evidence from around the world?
Yeah, in fact, I think we're particularly lucky in this particular section to have drawn heavily upon Latin American experience within cities, Ciclavia, cities on the move, where local mayors predominantly were the ones who really tried to change things and had the political clout and will to be able to, let's say, shut the roads down on a Sunday and make that part of their community-wide approach. So we drew mostly upon review level evidence on particular community-based interventions, a couple of Cochrane reviews, and then a couple of mass media or targeted interventions, perhaps promoting sport or, for example, walking. And again, we found these consistent blend of mass media and then programmatic approaches either within sectors or across sectors. And also, this is really critical, flavor of environmental change. You can't just do programmatic things and increase people's motivation and capability. You have to give them the opportunity to do it. So that means dropping the traffic levels, making sure things are safe, building cycle lanes, building good walking infrastructure, and giving people a reason to go to destinations as a family. And particularly in Latin America, those are the most successful ones. And I've seen some of those in Mexico. They're amazing.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I'm sure a few of the people listening to this podcast are quite familiar with the ecological model. And if they're not, a quick Google would definitely help with this one. But there is an individual and social, and then you've got those higher level kind of influences. And it sounds as though community-wide has to look at a few of those different ones. And the media strategy helps with kind of framing it all together. But there also has to be that environmental change as well as kind of individual and social level behavior change stuff.
Yeah, absolutely right, Tepi. Those sort of different ecological levels and layers are really valuing the factors that drive behavior that are well beyond the reach of most individuals. These are the policies, the way schools are located, the way buildings are built, where infrastructure is placed, where economic regeneration happens. These are usually outwit the kind of programmatic delivery of physical activity promoters, which is why a systems-based approach can allow you to include these big level changes and, of course, go on to get some advocacy leverage to support interventions that will help with physical activity, as well as all those other important social and economic drivers that we need to face at the moment.
Yeah, and with so many people kind of needing to or should be involved in these community-wide programs, they've got to be brought together somehow. And I suppose that shares similarities with a systems-based approach where, some of those systems maps are developed in tandem with the stakeholders. If that's the the local mayor, if that's the, local health departments. So, I mean, that really leads nicely into the next question. Who is this investment most relevant for, and who needs to be involved? And
Okay, so I think clearly with the kind of scale we're talking about, community level, We're looking for senior leadership within public health, transport, education, all the important sectors. Somebody's got to take charge, and that has to be, whoever that is, they have to recognize they're working with other people alongside who've got other competing agendas, but which physical activity could be a really important byproduct of their decision making. So I think there tends to be senior leadership within city in terms of developing programs, etc. It's not just sport promotion's job anymore, physical activity delivery. It's all our jobs. So there isn't one most important place. We're all important. And that's the point of the systems approach.
Yeah, and anybody not familiar with systems approach who Googles a systems map would quickly find that apparent. Possibly looking at the mad sprawlings of scientists, but actually when you start to look at it, the links start to make sense, and they outline all of those kind of different players, the transport, the sport.
Yeah, and I can occasionally be quite cynical about evidence, but my experience of developing systems map, it isn't really the map at the end is the most important thing. The most important thing has been the journey of the people in the room to recognize each other's unique roles in what they can contribute to promote physical activity. And I remember working in a city in the north of England, and for almost a revelatory moment when the council's architect recognized that his regeneration project, which is 20 million in the center of his town, had massive physical activity implications. How do people travel there? Is there parking provided? What about people with disabilities? How are they going to access it? What happens in the evening? How's this brilliant, beautiful space they're creating going to be used? Are they going to ban kids on skateboards and roller skates and inline and on scooters? Or are they going to let them use the infrastructure to play on? And it was just a dropping moment. And that was when I realized that the systems approaches can really unlock that kind of broad thinking that we want. We have to get our politicians and elected officials to adopt.
A really nice wrap up there. I mean, my final question are, what are the key recommendations then for this investment, policy, practice, and research?
Okay, well, the first recommendation is this stuff works, so let's start doing it. All right, and there's a challenge about scaling, and there's a challenge about, well, we're not sure it's going to work in our city, our town, etc., etc. So you have to get strong advocacy support at senior level to make this stuff happen. All right, you can't just unlock a community-based intervention by sticking together a few leaflets and having a snazzy logo. It doesn't change anything. So that kind of it's a long game. You're trying to build slowly. I think Sheffield made a very good example of that, and so are lots of other cities around the world. It's not an overnight win. It's going to take some time. So you need to develop relationships, advocacy support for your area, and bringing others with you. So at the time when you can build a systems-wide, community-wide program with a mix of mass media and different places to deliver physical activity, all those players and pieces are in the right space and place, and your population will benefit.
A real good finishing sales pitch. Fantastic. Love it.
The evidence is there, Tepi. It's not a sales pitch. Look at the evidence. It's
no, of
there.
course.
Come on, let's do it.
No, it's important how we frame stuff. It's definitely important. I think the way I think of it, and there might be some other people out there who had this same thought as you were talking. I think it shares elements of knowledge translation as well, and advocacy in terms of that co-production and kind of working together. You talked about the process being more important than the systems map product for systems approaches.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of similar in knowledge translation. Those dissemination products are just one part of it, and the relationships and the senior level advocacy is really where a lot of the good stuff happens.
Totally spot on, Tepi. You're gonna ace your PhD, Viva. It's going to be brilliant because you absolutely nailed that question. You're right, and in a post-COVID world, we have to band together with our local communities to regrow and re-energize and reshare the distribution of opportunities, because there are a lot of challenges that face us, and our normal program delivery models aren't going to work. So let's start where people are at and what they want.
Thanks very much, Charlie.
No problem.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. But if you haven't done so already, I'll encourage you to subscribe to your favourite podcast channel. The International Society for Physical Activity and Health podcast is available on all of the leading podcast channels, including Apple, Spotify, Google. If you've got an idea for a podcast, you can send that through to info@ispah.org. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you can join us on our podcast again soon.